Welcome to FOLKTALES Folklore, where we explore new stories and tell old tales. We are building a community through the ancient art of storytelling. We share our stories, and we hope to inspire you to stand up, sing out, to find your voice. Our stories shape our world. Your story can change the world. Join the chorus and fall in love with the world again and all of its possibilities. Today we're out in the prairie to celebrate one of my favorite winged friends, and no, it's not a bird. We're here to celebrate butterflies, butterfly tales. I would like to begin with a dream within a dream. I've heard this as both a Buddhist koan and as a Scottish traveler's tale. But many long years ago, there was a man who was sleeping, and in his dream, he dreamed that he was a butterfly, and he began to flutter about these beautiful meadows. He flew high over the meadow and down the side of a hill. He flew down towards a creek where there was an old skull. And to him, it was like a castle, white castle with white marble walls. And he flew in the eye and through the mouth and out the other eye of this beautiful white marble castle. And he flew down along the creek. And it was the most delightful dream. And then he flew back. He flew back up through the skull, through this white castle, up through the meadow, and back home. And he was in bed. And when he woke up, he lay there for a moment, thinking about this beautiful dream and wondering, was he a butterfly? Was he a man dreaming he was a butterfly? Or was he a butterfly dreaming that he was a man? What a delightful idea. Are you a human? Have you dreamed of being another creature? Or might you be a butterfly right this moment, dreaming that you are a human creature? This next story is from the Lakota. I learned this story from Jim Two Crows Wallen, a good friend of mine, and a really great storyteller. And maybe you can relate to the child in this story. Not so long ago, not so far away, there was a boy who loved to be out in the meadows, out in the prairie. He loved the butterflies, especially the little yellow sulfur butterfly. Now sometimes his friends would get together and they'd play tag, you're it, ha ha! Or they would play stickball, and whatever game they were playing, he was often the last one to be picked. Sometimes they'd say, I'll take this person on my team, I'll take that person on my team, and he wouldn't even get picked. You know that feeling? But one day after such an experience, his grandma, who was watching, his grandma was a very wise woman. She said, boy, come here. I have a little secret to tell you. Psh, 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 psh. And she whispered in his ear. She said, you see that little yellow butterfly fluttering about? I want you to catch it. If you can catch it in your hand without harming it, do not bend one bit of wing. Do not break a leg. If you can capture that butterfly without harming it, it will give you its magic. It will give you speed and agility and gifts you could never imagine before. Well, the boy thought that was pretty cool. And so just as his grandma told him to do, he went out and he started chasing this butterfly. He saw it flying over here and flying over there, and he ran, but the butterfly was always too close to him, and he couldn't catch it. Well, then he got a little smarter. He would sneak up on the butterfly. When the butterfly would land, shh, he would move as slowly as he could. And very slowly, he tried, but it got away and it flew off again. And he would follow it. And he would wait until it landed once more. And when it landed, shh, he would move so slow that even staring at him You could hardly tell he was moving. He would get as close as he dared. And oh, he caught it, he caught it, he caught it! Grandma, Grandma, look what I caught! And he ran up to his grandmother, and she said, now let it go. What? Let it go. What? I just spent half a day trying to catch this butterfly, and you want me to let it go? And his grandma said, you heard me. Let it go. Oh, he really didn't want to. But this boy always did what his elders told him to do. And so he let it go. And sure enough, it flew away. And she said, ah, you were very good. You did not injure that butterfly. It did not look like the wing was bent, the leg was broken. It flew away safely and it will live another day. Now look at your hands. Look at your hands. The boy looked, and it was like little bits of glitter, gold. The yellow sulfur butterfly. Actually tiny little scales, which they normally lose, just like you lose a hair or a bird loses a feather. They covered his hands. His hands seemed to glitter in the sunlight. She said, now take that glitter and rub it on your arms. Rub it on your legs. And then go and catch another butterfly. Now the first butterfly, it took him half a day, hours to catch. The next one he caught in about an hour and a half. And again, he brought it back to his grandma. And she said, let it go. And when he did, they saw that it flew away and it wasn't harmed, and there was gold. And he rubbed the gold on his legs and his arms. The next one he caught in half an hour. The next one, it took him maybe 10 minutes. Each time he got faster, more agile, more swift, but also more cautious, more conscious, more aware and careful. Now some of the other boys and girls, they saw what he was doing. They said, what are you doing? He was reluctant to tell them because his grandma said it was a secret. But those that had been nice to him, he let them in on the secret. And soon there were a dozen boys and girls chasing butterflies, all of them very careful to never harm the butterfly, to always make sure when they let it go, it flew away safely. And then they took that gold and they rubbed it on their arms and legs. Now I have to ask, was it the gold? Was it magic? Or was it simply the act of paying attention, persistence, agility, and catching the butterfly that trained the boy? You decide. But I tell you what I do know. From that day on, that boy was not the last one to be picked. He was often the first. He was the swiftest, the fastest, most agile, and became a great athlete among the people. I know this is true because this story has been passed down from generation to generation to generation and eventually told to me so I could tell it to you and you could tell it too. But my friend, Jim Two Crows, he knew the woman who knew the man who knew the boy that this story happened to. I have always loved butterflies. Even when I was a small boy, our backyard was very tiny inner city neighborhood. Nothing like this beautiful prairie that I am steward for these days. But my father did buy 40 acres up in Michigan. And I remember as a small boy, we would collect seeds of some of the wildflowers and we would bring them back to the city and we planted them in our yard. And my father was always excited when new flowers would bloom because new butterflies would appear. Relatively new science in my lifetime, we have figured out that monarchs and milkweed have a very important symbiotic relationship. That monarchs will only lay their eggs on a species of the milkweed family. And they pollinate the milkweed, so they help them produce seeds. You can see milkweed here around us. But also, the milkweed has a poison in it that the monarch caterpillar eats, and that poison then protects them so that they do not get eaten by birds. And if a bird accidentally eats a monarch or a caterpillar, they regurgitate. That poison protects them. And then that bird will never eat another monarch or monarch caterpillar. Well, this is all relatively new science. And even newer still, I remember when I was a young adult that they finally mapped monarch migration. The idea that insects, something as small and paperweight as a butterfly, could fly thousands of miles, kind of blows your mind to think about. Being that small and to fly all the way to Mexico. Again, that's relatively new science. There are still discoveries that you might make. Like which butterflies lay their eggs on which plants. We have dozens of them already mapped out, but there's other species we're still trying to study. And are there other species of butterflies that migrate? As far as we know, the monarch is the main one, but how do other butterflies survive the winter? Simply by asking these kinds of questions and then going outside and following some butterflies around. You could learn from them. What are their favorite flowers? Where do they lay their eggs? I'll never forget when I was a kid, I think maybe I was about 8 years old. And I remember that age because I was allowed to ride my bike around the block on our inner city neighborhood, but I wasn't allowed to cross the street without my mom's permission. So I did have a cousin who lived about 3 blocks away, and my grandma lived about a block away. So I could go to my grandma's or I could go to my cousin's if I told my mom where I was going, when I was leaving, when I'd be back. But other than that, I was not allowed to cross the street. I had to stay on our city block, which usually was fine. We had a big playground on the Catholic schoolyard. We had a big field on the churchyard where we could play football. I love my neighborhood. But I'll never forget one time I was riding my bike around the block, and off in the distance, I saw this strange cloud. And as it grew closer and closer, I realized this was no ordinary cloud. It wasn't a rain cloud. It was flying too low. And just the way that this cloud moved through the sky, it was a cloud of butterflies. Thousands and thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands. I have no idea how many. It was literally a river of orange and black monarch butterflies. I'll never forget the image of that. Flying over our house, over our block. But they didn't have a mom like mine who told them don't cross the street. They went on down the street. And I was breaking the rules, and I apologize to my mother if she ever sees this video, but I crossed the street. And I followed it for several blocks, past my cousin's house, down towards the river. I live near the Maumee River, and the Maumee River generally flows from the northeast to the southwest. And I learned later that that river is actually an important migratory route for birds and butterflies. And I followed them from several blocks. And I was riding underneath this huge cloud of orange and black as it flew over me on my little bike riding along. Of course, I stopped when I got down near the river. I couldn't cross the river on a bicycle. But I watched them continue downstream. And they flew on. And I swear it was an hour of butterflies flying overhead. That river of butterflies following the Maumee River. I now know those same butterflies would fly all the way to Mexico. Gosh, kind of blows your mind to think about it. Something so small could travel so far. But even more amazing, more astounding, one butterfly flies all the way from here to Mexico. But more amazing still, that's not the butterfly that comes back. That butterfly will winter over in a semi-hibernative state in the fir forest in the mountains of Mexico. But then it will start to fly north, maybe into Texas or northern Mexico. And as soon as the milkweed starts to sprout, it will stop and lay eggs. And those tiny little eggs that are like a translucent green dot will hatch. And a little tiny caterpillar will eat and 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 eat. And as it eats, it grows. And then it will become a chrysalis. And it will transform. Through metamorphosis, it becomes a butterfly. And that butterfly flutters from Texas maybe to Arkansas or Tennessee. And then it stops. And it lays an egg, or hundreds of eggs. And the grandchild of the one who flew south will fly from Tennessee or Arkansas back here to Illinois or to Ohio or Indiana or Missouri. And when the milkweed turns green in the spring, they will stop and lay eggs. And it's the great-grandchild of that butterfly that flew to Mexico, that will fly to northern Michigan or Minnesota or even into Canada, that it's 3 or 4 or even 5 generations to get all the way back. It is simply miraculous. You can make a difference in the life of butterflies. If you just plant a few milkweed. Here in my prairie, I'm actually growing 4 different kinds. The common milkweed, which is the easiest to grow and the most common. But I also love the swamp milkweed. If you have a wet spot in your garden, or maybe where your downspout comes out, swamp milkweed has the sweetest smell. I also have prairie milkweed, which is a little thinner leaf and a little more spindly and tall. And I have butterfly weed. It's shorter with broad leaves and bright orange flowers. There's about 6 or 7 varieties depending on where you live in the prairie states. And if you grow at least one of them in your yard, maybe you'll experience this miracle. Maybe you'll have the great good fortune to see a monarch lay an egg and see that little caterpillar eat and eat and eat and eat and eat and grow and transform through metamorphosis to become a butterfly. And late in the summer, early fall, if you have a butterfly net and you gently catch them, you can actually put a thin paper tag on their wing with a small number and record those numbers, and you can help to track their migration, to know how many go, how far they go, how much they might travel in a day or a week or a month, how many survive in the shrinking forest of Mexico, and then how many begin that migration back. You can be part of this citizen science program monitoring the migration of butterflies. Let's go back to one of the grandfathers of this kind of entomology, one of my personal heroes. Charles Darwin discovered this unusual moth in Madagascar and the orchid that it pollinates, and was one of the first to write about pollinators and the flowers they pollinate and how the two of them evolved together. But you've heard enough from me. Let's hear Charles Darwin's version of this story. Good day, my name is Charles Darwin, and I must tell you, I have always been in love with pollinators. When I was a young college student at Cambridge, my professor, Reverend Henslow, a professor of botany who helped me to appreciate the importance of the pollination of plants, he introduced me to John James Audubon, the famous North American ornithologist. When I saw Audubon's original drawing of the ruby-throated hummingbird on a trumpet vine, it's quite obvious that the beak of the hummingbird is adapted to pollinate the trumpet vine. When I published my now famous book on the origin of species in 1859, I write about a very rare orchid, the comet orchid, that I found in Malaysia. Now, this orchid has a foot-long spur, more than 12 inches long. The nectar, the nectary, is stored there at the base of that spur. And so it's quite obvious that there must be some kind of pollinator with a foot-long tongue or proboscis. Because why would the nectar be hidden so far from the flower base itself if there wasn't some creature able to sip that nectar? And clearly, whoever is pollinating this flower has a foot-long tongue or proboscis and is able to sip that nectar and therefore carries pollen from one comet orchid to another. Now, when I published this in my book, I saw it as a perfect example of my theory of the origin of species, that species adapt over time in their effort to survive. And in the struggle for survival, as species adapt, those traits are inherited by their offspring if they are successful at getting the nectar, the sugar they need, the energy they need. And so it's a perfect example of my theory of evolution. And yet, when I published this in my book, people ridiculed the entire book, willing to throw away all of my research because they could not imagine a bat or a bird with a foot-long tongue. How preposterous, they thought. Well, have you not seen a monarch butterfly? Any species of butterfly has a proboscis, a tongue like a hollow straw that they can curl up. It was nearly 50 years later that they discovered the sphinx moth that lives only in the rainforest of Malaysia and is the only insect that pollinates this comet orchid. So if the orchid disappears through the destruction of the rainforest, then the moth would also become extinct. Or if the moth becomes extinct because it's collected to be dried and pinned in boards of museums, then the flower would also become extinct. The two have clearly evolved together. Later in life, I actually published a book on how orchids adapt to their pollinators, and another how the same species of flower might have different shapes of flowers in different geographical ranges because they're adapting to their pollinator. And the pollinator, the butterfly or moth, adapts to the flower. This theory is most evident in the hummingbirds of the Americas. First, it's important that you know that hummingbirds only exist in the Americas. In most of the eastern United States, you have one species, the ruby-throated hummingbird. In the western United States, you have more than 16 species. But when you get into South America, there are more than 30 species in one country, Colombia alone. And you can see that some of them have a slightly curved beak because they're adapted to curved flowers. Some, like the thornbill, have a very long beak because they are pollinating longer nectaries or spurs in longer flowers. It is quite obvious the way that pollinators adapt to the flower they pollinate, and over time, the flowers adapt to their pollinators in co-evolution. So as you wander the prairies and forests of your home, looking at butterflies and other pollinators, look at the flowers and see how the two have adapted together in co-evolution. Let's end this episode where we probably should have began, with the creation of butterflies. Our friend from Niche Theater is going to share the story of how butterflies came to be.
Hi, it's Sophia here. Have you ever seen a butterfly before? I bet you have. Can you think of the most beautiful butterfly you've ever seen? Well, I'm going to tell you about how butterflies came to be. Once upon a time, long, long ago, Elder Brother was out for a walk. The summer rains had just ended, and all around him he was surrounded by the beautiful colors of autumn. He could hear the birds chirping in the distance. He stumbled upon a village where young women were grinding corn and children were playing loud and happy, and that made him happy too. The world is beautiful, he thought, so he sat down to enjoy it. Then suddenly, he became sad. Winter is coming soon, he thought. The beautiful autumn leaves will soon shrivel and fall, and the beautiful, colorful flowers will soon fade. As he watched the children play, he wanted to find a way to keep these colors so he and everyone else could enjoy them for longer. He always had a bag with him, his creation bag. So he started to gather colors. The blue from the sky, the gold from the rays of sunshine, the black from the woman's hair, the green from the pine needles, and the red, orange, and blue from the colorful flowers. He put all these colors into his bag and called out to the children, "Come, children, I have a gift for all of you." Several children came running over to see what this mysterious man's gift was. "Here, take it," he said. "Open it." The children slowly opened the bag, and hundreds of colorful butterflies fluttered out and landed on their hair and arms. The children giggled and laughed with joy. The women stopped grinding corn. The men came out from the fields to join their families. They outstretched their arms for the butterflies to land on. They had never seen something this beautiful before. Then the butterflies began to sing. Ah, ah, ah. The people were happy, but the birds were not. One bird perched on Elder Brother's shoulder and said, have given our songs away to these creatures that are way more beautiful than us, and we don't think that's fair. We were each given our song when we were made, our own song, and you have given them all away." Elder brother thought that they were right, so they gave their songs back to the birds, and the birds were happy. That is the story of how butterflies came to be and why they are silent. Their colors are a gift of beauty for everyone to share.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of FOLKTALES Folklore. Next time, invite your friends. And maybe you can send us a link to you telling one of your favorite folk tales, and we'll use it on an upcoming episode. Join our choir to fall in love with the world and all of its possibilities.